G'day guys, this will be a little quick one on peripheral insulin resistance. This is due to somebody actually asking me this question. I'll just share the screen. So basically, Latin Viking carnivore, he actually asked me this question. I know you will do, Harry, you are the best, whatever. Okay. I have seen the most recent Bart K video. He explains about certain insulin resistance due to the Randall cycle. But is it true that Aurelius says that it can lead to chronic insulin resistance or diabetes? I think Carnival's made a mess. I think that guy basically made a mess, but he's confusing now carnivores, other carnivores. And I sort of basically, as my standard sort of motif about when people talk shit, I said, he's a cockwomble. He seems to not even understand some basic biological processes. So this is my point. He doesn't. He's sort of reductionist in his understanding. You know, when you actually take things out of context, as Bart would say, and follow them through in a reductionist way, you get shit. It's like with the thyroid issue. You know, when people say, oh, you know, fasting or keto will increase reverse T3 and stuff like that. Well, it's a protective mechanism. If you actually increase, this is what happens to vegans. They do not engage the Randall cycle. They get into a catabolic state, but because there's too much insulin due to the carbohydrates they're consuming, what actually happens with not sufficient protein, they actually increase their T3 and they basically waste away their muscles. By when you're fasting, or when you are not getting enough, when you're doing a therapeutic ketogenic diet, which is not a good thing chronically, you know, and Bart's correct about that. What you'll do is you end up increasing reverse T3. But when you eat a steak and quite a bit of meat, what you do is you drop that. Remember there's selenium in there, and selenium actually inhibits reverse T3. Selenium is in eggs, meat, and all that sort of stuff. So when you're actually doing a species appropriate ketogenic diet, which is a keto carnivore diet, you don't get into this trouble. It is fucking impossible to get into this problem, you know? So it's nonsense. It's all these therapeutic or all these sort of crackpot guru fucktards that come up with all this nonsense about, 10% protein and mTOR, the threat that we're going to all die from cancer and all that. Absolutely cockwomble, reductionist bullshit. Now, I'll continue what I was reading. As long as you eat carnivore diet without cheating with alcohol or carbs, you will never engage the Randall cycle because the insulin to glucagon ratio will be low at around 1.3. Remember, fasting is 0.8. When you're at 1.3, you're very low. That means just enough for muscle protein synthesis. That means you get a lot leucine will bump up insulin, IGF-1 and mTOR just to the level for muscle protein synthesis, but not beyond that point to cause other growth, excessive growth. This is why the old bodybuilders that actually consumed, steak and eggs and stuff like that were lean all year round and were muscular. Today's bodybuilders that eat excessive carbohydrates like rice and other shit, or basically pump themselves with steroids and insulin and stuff like that, they cause this activation, sort of create an insulin resistant type environment. And they actually, by engaging the Randall cycle, they get enough, because of the additional aminos, I'll get the muscle protein synthesis, but they end up basically muscular fat and deranged. And that's why they're dying very young as well, because they are very sick people. the old bodybuilders, you know, dying in their 80s and 90s and beyond. I mean, that British guy that I talked about that died because he changed his diet and changed and got into catabolic activities like, you know, marathon running, gave up bodybuilding at 90 in his mid 90s, and 3 years later is dead. So let that be a lesson to you. The important thing that we need to understand is when glucagon is not that high, and you've got that sweet spot of 1.3. So glucagon isn't too high. So you're not basically, you know, and insulin isn't that high. So you're not pushing up any growth pathways, but you're not pushing up any catabolic state either. So when you're eating, that is, and, you know, when you're eating basically a steak, you're eating eggs and stuff like that. If you add in there other substrates, other things, you will change that ratio. If you take out protein, like a therapeutic ketogenic bullshit diet, which is unnecessary for 99% of the population, you will basically push glucagon much higher and you'll waste away. And you'll also put your thyroid in the toilet. And if you do that chronically, you'll have problems. It's all this bullshit. They listen to gurus that talk shit and actually confuse them and all that. That's why I needed to do this sort of thing, because I know Bart tends to do a very more academic approach of saying this, you know, is not, you know, in terms of physiology and stuff like that, it's wrong for this and this reason and all that. But you guys need a sort of a simple, you know, logical sort of, you know, common sense. And that's what I'm giving you here. So I'm saying to you, it is impossible when you've got an insulin to glucagon ratio, which is nearly close to 1.3 to 1, you don't have excessive gluconeogenesis or basically catabolic sort of state, stressful sort of state, and you don't basically, you have this low-grade ketosis, a bit like the Maasai, which Mary noticed with the Maasai, that basically, and this is a point that I made earlier because we've been having a long conversation I've had with him, and I actually mentioned that, you know, because he actually said, oh, you know, is worried that, you know, the carnivore community wouldn't be the same if I changed in the future. It's not going to happen. As I said to him, I said, never will, mate. After seeing the archaeological N1415 data about a decade ago, I would have to suffer amnesia for something, and I do have a solution for that, taurine. Go and see my good recent video, for something like that to happen. Impossible. And as I pointed out, I hope I can reverse all my past damage, because I still got damage. I still need to reverse a lot of it. You know, it's only in the recent years that I've cleaned up a lot of things in my diet. So when I'm 80, I still run up hillsides as the old Maasai that Mary spoke about, that she couldn't keep up with. That old bloke who was in his 80s and he was muscular and fit. That's what I want to be when I get to my 80s. That's what we all want to be, you know, where we're basically healthy, strong. And then when we can no longer do any more cell division, because, you know, cell division finishes at a certain point, we just drop dead, healthy until the end, you know, and it's just the last bit where too much senescence overwhelms our system and just kills us off. And that is basically dying of old age. At that point when most organ systems fail because of too much senescence in the different organs. But we've got a high hack for that as well. As you know, I'll be doing a specific video to explain in more detail. That's for another point, another day. Now, let me continue this. As long as glucagon is preventing insulin from rising, chronic insulin resistance, too much fat and sugar in the cell isn't possible. It just isn't. You know, at that level of 1.3 insulin to glucagon, you're not going to actually create a lot of glucose. Glucose is going to be in the sweet spot, the low normal, and insulin is going to be low, just enough for muscle protein synthesis. Not an issue. So eat your fucking meat. He's a dickhead. He has no idea about human physiology. In a low carb state, your body undergoes peripheral insulin resistance. It fucking does. There's a reason for it. You know, there are certain people that basically have different ways of actually calling it. I've heard people call it physiological insulin resistance, adaptive insulin, peripheral insulin resistance, a normal adaptation to the lack of dietary glucose. There's a lot of ways people just call it in that regard. But I basically just call it what it's called, peripheral insulin resistance. That is to say muscles, this is muscles we're talking about when we're talking about peripheral resistance. Muscles, GLUT4 receptors downregulate in order for the body to conserve gluconeogenic glucose for the brain and red blood cells. That is the key thing. So the demand-driven glucose that is produced because a proportion, the brain can run on ketones, but it does need a certain proportion of glucose as well for certain biological functions in the brain. So fats and ketones can't cover it all. There has to be a bit of glucose. That's what gluconeogenesis, demand-driven gluconeogenesis does. It provides that small amount of substrate for the brain and the red blood cells. So obviously you have to create peripheral resistance. That's a normal physiological function. It happens when you fast. It happens when you're in a low carbohydrate state. It's normal. It's to protect basically the brain and the red blood cells. That means so your muscles do not suck up the actual glucose. Understood? That's the reason. This is a normal physiological adaptive response when in ketosis, whether in deep ketosis or low ketosis. So basically that is what it is. It's nothing mystical. This is normal adaptation. It happens in every single human. This is your genes. Your genes basically have been doing this for millions and millions of years of all hominins and amongst all species past and whatever human species will evolve in the future if that happens. The reality is that as long as the insulin to glucagon ratio is at this level, there is no way. And the other thing very important to remember, I've been saying this plenty of times about when we're talking about in mTOR and IGF-1, because they keep on bringing this bullshit up. Oh, too much meat will create mTOR. No, it won't. Insulin and IGF-1 go together. In primitive organisms, hundreds of millions of years ago, insulin and IGF-1 were one thing. There's a division of labor now. It's actually separated them, but they go in lockstep. IGF-1 goes up, insulin goes up at the same time. They go together up and down. They don't go separate. This doesn't happen, okay? It's not in the literature that they go separate. They go, if insulin goes high, so does IGF-1. If insulin doesn't go very high, neither does IGF-1. The same thing with mTOR. If these are not going very high, mTOR's not going to go very high. This is why these guys that really want to build up massive tissue, that's why they die as well very young, because they do it very unnaturally, very fast. They pump themselves silly with anabolic steroids and with insulin to force all these growth factors up, to build tissue rapidly up, which is very unhealthy. But that's what they do. That's why they're dying very young. But this is what's happening. That is not a normal state, okay? That's somebody who's basically has got, body issues, and insecurities or whatever else, and needs to basically build up a certain body or physiology to, to basically whatever, so I think it's a stupid sport the way it's turned out. It's no longer natural, where normal, beautiful, lean, muscular bodies. It's all these basically, hyper growth bodies, which are just unnatural and disgusting. They're just out of proportion. If you want to be like that, you're an idiot as far as I'm concerned. And I don't mind saying it, and I'll say it again, you're a fucking idiot, But the reality is that, if you eat a steak only diet, you will maintain very good levels. The other thing about when, they talk about this thyroid thing and all that, another piece of bullshit. Reverse T3, when it goes up, and your TSH comes down, it's not an issue. It's only when you're on a kibble diet or on a low protein, on a stupid low protein diet or whatever, like vegans and vegetarians and all that, they suffer from hypothyroidism. Why? Not enough fat soluble vitamins, in particular vitamin D and a number of that, not enough zinc, not enough selenium, not enough iodine. All these things are in animal foods. They actually provide the nutrients for all these hormonal, the micronutrients for all these hormones to work properly. And they will work in the normal physiological range, which, they'll come down or go up depending on what you're eating and all that. That is not unhealthy. It's when there is, you're pushing up high TSH and and you're not basically too much high reverse, a crackpot will say, oh, there's a problem there. No, if the TSH comes down and reverse T3 goes up, that's just a protective mechanism so you don't waste away your muscles. So when you're doing very fasting or stuff like that, or very low protein type ketogenic diets, therapeutic bullshit, short term may be fine, but long term it's very unhealthy, very catabolic. But, and another point, you don't want to be basically running very high thyroid anyway. You want to die quick, as Bart would say. Most centenarians, a point that Bart didn't bring up, most centenarians, when they look at them, they're actually having a TSH which is slightly lower and a reverse T3 which is slightly higher. And they're in a more insulin sensitive state. The only way to get into that similar state is on a carnivore diet. So you want to have that sort of state that actually gives you longevity without the longevity genes, eat your fucking meat is what I would say. So that's pretty much covering that point in terms of that cockwomble in that regard. And that's pretty much, and that pretty much covers a bit of the hypothyroid sort of situation. Just look at, Lukey. He was on a kibble diet. He had Hashimoto's. Things have reversed quite dramatically since he's upped his vitamin D, which is very important. And basically, he's, more carnivorous. It's impossible on a species appropriate diet. And if you remember, Mary was actually testing all the Maasai, and they had very similar low-grade ketosis and very low normal blood sugars. They were in a very, that low-grade ketosis, what we talk about in a carnivore diet, where you swing in and out that low grade. That is the best place to be in terms of the hormones, that really healthy sort of state, not too over-exaggerated in either direction. That's a bad thing as far as I'm concerned. The human species appropriate diet is the one that puts you in that sweet spot in terms of insulin, glucagon, all these other things. These people that are racing for these high levels and all that, they are very unhealthy. They end up very unhealthy people, and they will shorten their life, and they will degenerate like Ray Peat, who won't even show his face anymore because he's a fucking degenerate, falling apart, and he can't work it out. Poor bastard. That's all I can say. But as I said, I would debate him anytime he would like, and I suspect Bart would be very close in willing to do that same thing. But unfortunately, the master is avoiding people like myself and Bart and others who can tear him a big arsehole because he deserves it. He's a crackpot of the highest order, putting out disinformation, and unfortunately, some people who don't understand biochemistry or physiology to sufficient levels and don't basically rely on, and rely on sort of on anecdotes and all sorts of nonsense and stuff like that of their own making of, guru type shit, tend to basically very easily fall into these traps. As I said, the biggest threat to the carnivore movement is Ray Peat and reductionist thinking. Our bodies do not work. This is low, you have to see it in the context. This is low because it's got a reason. It's a protective adaptation. You don't want high, the thyroid to be, to have very high T3 when you're not getting in it, when you're in a fasted state. As an example, you'll waste away your muscles. That's what happens to vegans, So too catabolic. There are reasons for these protective mechanisms in there, and they actually are activated in an appropriate way. So don't fall for the bullshit. And, eat your fucking meat and you will maintain good, healthy levels of insulin, IGF-1 and mTOR, and you will have good nutrition to maintain good cellular and biological function, and you'll be healthy. And as long as you basically maintain that healthy state, you'll have a long life. So that's the key thing, take home message that you guys should understand, and don't fall for the bullshit, and please do not do these sort of crazy guru type of extreme low carbohydrate, very low protein. Protein is healthy. Protein does not increase mTOR, IGF-1 or insulin to very high levels. As long as there's no carbs in there, as long as there's no other shit. If you throw in there carbs, alcohol, those sort of things, you will be engaging the Randall cycle. And then your insulin to glucagon ratio will not be 1.3, but will be significantly higher. And you'll cause some derangement. It'll be a small period of derangement, and then you can, as long as you're not back on a sad diet, then, you'll be in a deranged state for a short period. You'll feel like shit, and then you'll basically get back to it. But, why do it to yourself? Now, obviously, I'm probably my worst enemy, and sometimes I give you guys too much information how to do these fucking, it's to inform you to help others, but it doesn't mean that you should use some of my biohacks. I mean, I've done it in the past. I probably shouldn't have. It's wrong, but, sometimes to be sociable, end of year sort of parties and stuff like that, or people basically retiring, you turn up and I need to protect myself. And that's why I've given you that information. It's not a license to go and do shit all year round. It's basically information that can help you guys to basically, have those little cheat moments, which basically is part of, living with other people and all that sort of stuff. As long as it's not a daily basis or a regular thing, you may feel like shit, but you've done that part of your social responsibility, or whatever you want to call it, or socialization thing or whatever. But try to keep it down, but also talk with your friends and say, well, I don't do this sort of stuff anymore for these and these reasons. So that's the other part of it as well. So I sometimes turn up, I fast, I do the, I don't fast. I basically eat a bit more meat, and then we'll basically have my alcohol or whatever. And then the next day I fast to clear it all out as fast as possible to get back to normal. Because, I just need to stop doing that sort of shit in that regard. But I hope this sort of, cleared up peripheral insulin resistance. It's not a problem. It's actually a good thing. If the body knows what it's doing. It's been doing it for millions and thousands of years. All animals do this. This peripheral resistance is basically to conserve glucose for the brain and red blood cells. There's nothing wrong with it. It's normal. It's when we do something inappropriate that we can cause derangement to that for a small period of time. And then chronically, if we continue down that road with carbohydrates on a daily basis, that means if we shift back to a sad diet, that's not what we want to do either. So this is how we need to understand this whole process. So, this guy's just using reductionism like the Peat people use, and something which is a protective mechanism so you don't waste away your muscles and stuff like that. And when it comes to the hormonal side of the hormone of thyroid, or basically the other side of the coin, which is preserving glucose at that normal level for those essential requirements in other tissue. There's not a problem with that. That's normal. I mean, the Maasai do it multi-generationally. The Inuit do it multi-generationally. If they couldn't do it, they'd be dead. They wouldn't have survived in those environments. They wouldn't have been able to breed either. The people that I see can't breed properly are people on a SAD diet, people basically on a kibble diet, and people that are eating too many carbohydrates. They're the ones with all the endocrine disrupting hormones and all the other problems from their diet. I don't see them healthy, but I see these ancestral groups that are eating meat, primarily animal foods, and are very healthy and don't have any of these problems and live long lives and live healthy lives and are robust until the end. So, these people basically need to stop peddling reductionist nonsense and things that are completely and utterly irrelevant and illogical. I'm sick of it. And we need to push back. And please, post this around so people are aware of this garbage, because we need to basically smack the Peat fan club in the fucking head. Need to take a baseball bat to that mob. They are a bunch of crackpots, and they are misrepresenting, a lot of information in regards to how human physiology works. So, we need to basically take the fight to them and stop basically be pussyfooting around. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this and got some information. Got a sort of a basic explanation without too much biochemistry or anything like that, so you guys can get your head around it. I hope I've actually achieved that. If I haven't, then I've failed, and I apologize. But if I have, it probably will help you guys, because at the end of the day, they use all these fancy words and stuff and reductionist sort of stuff, which they can point to, but it's out of context. It's basically skewed in some way, deliberately to push a narrative. But if you guys don't understand it, when you understand logic, I basically explain to you those sort of things. When it's insulin to glucagon is 1.3, your insulin is going to be that low level. And glucagon is going to be tempered. Both are going to be very tightly in a much lower grade. So not too much glucagon, not too much basically insulin at that lower. And that's beautiful sweet spot, just above what you would get from fasting. So you're not in any danger zone. You're not in any hypergrowth sort of danger zone for cancer or any of these diseases. And you're not basically in a catabolic state either, in a severe catabolic state to basically being, stressing the body or causing any problems. Our diet doesn't cause those problems. And we need to point this out that, when you eat a steak, any human on this planet can actually do the experiment. They can go and test themselves out, and they can see a 1.3 or around that level of insulin to glucagon when they're eating a steak. And that's important, because what it does is it actually means that if that is consistent in every single human when we experiment, it means it's replicatable truth. And all the other stuff is reductionist nonsense, because they can't demonstrate mechanism. But we can actually demonstrate mechanism through getting people tested, just having a steak and nothing else, no other crap, just steak or eggs or steak and eggs or whatever. They will have that insulin to glucagon 1.3. And that is a beautiful place to be. It's slightly anabolic. It's not catabolic, not stressful, slightly anabolic. And then when you're not eating, you come slightly out of it and come back into it. But you do this. You're not doing these big changes or any other strange sort of effects. That's the advantage of a carnivore diet, eating sufficient protein. And as I've said, made it quite clear, protein is important. You know, you need to be over 2 grams, minimum 2 grams per kilo body weight. Don't listen to the crackpots out there. You've got enzymes that require protein. You've got tissue that requires protein. The RDIs are just for tissue. You've got a lot of things that require, let alone repair or reparative when you're fasting in between and when you're basically you're doing a bit of autophagy in time-restricted feeding. You need additional aminos to be available, and when you eat more protein, what happens is peristalsis slows down. It's a good thing. It slows down to basically absorb more of those proteins over more hours. So, rather than 2 hours or 3 hours, it'll actually be over 6 hours, which mean it'll slowly take in more aminos and more aminos and more aminos and do all the different cellular functions and all the different repairs and all that. And that's what you want. You want the body to basically do that. These are not an issue. This is why basically we poop out a very small amount and we may take 1 or 2 days, sometimes every day, depending on, if you eat a bit of dairy, it's going to be more, you're going to get a bit more of that on a daily basis. I eat dairy, so I poop every day, small amounts, but I still poop every day. If you're basically just eating a steak and eggs, you may basically poop every second day, or, depends, how much the body's taking in, how much it needs and stuff like that. But when you give the body far more protein, it will take it up. Even without exercise, we can show, there are studies that actually show you can put on muscle, you can grow muscle. That is, you're not growing fat, you're becoming lean and you're growing muscle mass by that additional. Remember the actual rats that were on 70% protein? They were completely lean, absolutely zero fat. The little other mice, remember in that study, were tiny little, frail little pieces of shit eating kibble. And so consider that a vegan mouse. And then basically you had the big motherfucker carnivore mouse. It was a big motherfucker like that, double the size, big muscular, beautiful fur coat. And, fucker must have been horny as, strong mouse, would annihilate the ladies, I can tell you. And that mouse was so strong and muscular, when they opened it up, there was hardly any fat in it. It was lean as, that was a fucking muscular, strong muscular, it reminds me of those old, bodybuilders, lean and muscular, eating steak and eggs. So learn, those are fundamental experiments where they've taken all the crap out. All the modern studies are done by crackpots. We know that. They're financed by industry. They're financed by, they've got an agenda. Most of them are vegetarians or vegans, and they put in poisons like seed oils, sugars, and stuff like that. Why? They do it deliberately to misrepresent things. And they put some proteins or they put some fats and they go, oh, look at how deleterious it is. It's an association, but look how deleterious it is. Bullshit association, which they've created deliberately to misdirect, misinform. They are crackpots and they are criminals because they don't care about human health. These people, they'll do any sort of bullshit study for the dosh and for their misanthropic ideology. They're not interested in human health. The old scientists were actually interested in learning, understanding how the body works. That's why I go back to those studies, or sometimes the overseas studies like in Russia or some parts of Asia and all that, where they're still doing some basic research. They're trying to find out how things work in mechanisms, how things work in the body. That's what we want to know so we can better biohack or better adjust some of the stuff we're doing to get better longevity and better, physical health, long-term where there's no frailty, where we're strong. And from all the stuff that I've seen in the literature, a carnivore diet is the must, is the best. Eating animal protein is really, really fucking good. Simple as that. We shouldn't be scared of it. You're not going to over-exaggerate IGF-1 or insulin or mTOR. They go together, these growth factors. And when you've got an insulin to glucagon ratio of 1.3, how the fuck are you, what, magically, like a unicorn is going to appear? You know, what a load of garbage. It's absolute garbage. You know, it's nonsense. This will not happen. So you need to understand that they are talking crackpots. They use all this sort of pseudo science and reductionism and you know, fill in the reductionist blank holes. And that's what they are, because they can't demonstrate mechanism. They can't show a specific study that shows this. You know, as I say, show me a steak-only diet that basically generates some sort of insulin resistance, Randall cycle activation. Doesn't exist, never will. It's physiologically impossible. It's crap, you know? So let's nip it in the bud. Let's kick them for 6, because that's what they deserve, to be basically humiliated, shown for what they are, the crackpots that they are, the misinformation, misanthropic information that they are peddling like the vegans. They are a bunch of cockwombles, idiots. They've got no understanding and they can't prove anything. And as I would say to them, you know, eat a steak-only diet for a month and go and actually do a test and check it for yourself and see where your, you know, those hormones are. They're going to be in a beautiful sweet spot, everything. Like a lot of us that have done these sort of tests, no. So, you know, they need to prove, because they are making the claims. They need to prove and demonstrate mechanism, something that they have failed to do. So as long as they fail to do that, as far as I'm concerned, I'm more than justified calling them crackpots. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow in the live streams. See you guys, and good night.